Hey everyone, it's Aesah, and welcome to my patch 14.6 meta update. As of the time of recording this video, the patch has been out for about 24 hours, so I've had time to play about 15 games, and I want to look at some early data and talk about the biggest changes in this patch compared to last patch. I frequently use Tactics.Tools, but I'm going to use MetaTFT's comps guide today. I think just going here and looking at the top comps will give you a pretty good idea. I know some top challenger players prefer using more specific filters, but I think this is generally going to be very acceptable for getting an idea of what's performing well in the meta. I think the biggest change compared to last patch is this ExoTech Zeri comp. There are really big changes, really big buffs to 7 ExoTech. So this is familiar. If you played at the start of the set on level 8, you'll play Kindred to give Jhin and Zeri their offensive traits. Jhin also got a direct buff as well as a trait, so he's going to be a pretty good item holder again. Last patch, a lot of times we're playing 5 ExoTech with Misfortune as a duo carry, but 7 ExoTech is preferable now. I would say the second biggest change of the patch is 6 Vanguard got a pretty big buff from 40% to 48%. This benefits the Cogmog comp the best because you can just play 2 backliners and play 6 Vanguards on level 8. And then on level 9, you can add in maybe like Aesah if you don't have Kindred 3, for example, or Aphelios. Either one, you'll have their trace active with Anima Squad or Golden Ox. The Vanguard Z still performing well as it did last patch. Garen got a direct buff as well as Gragas, 2 units that are frequently played in this comp. Most notably, Sterex got a really big buff last patch. It got an item rework, I guess. So Sterex did receive a small nerf this patch, but it's still really good, and this comp just uses it really well. Dynamo received a small nerf overall on the trait. However, last patch it was the best comp in the game by a little bit. It wasn't overwhelmingly dominant or anything, but it was the best comp. And even though Dynamo did receive a nerf, Misfortune and Jhin got direct buffs, as well as some of the other units you might play, like Gragas in this board. So this comp is still really good, despite being nerfed. You can see it's ranked number 4 using MetaTFT's algorithm, which, again, I think is definitely good enough to follow. Vex, this is a comp that's been around for a while. You can play the Divincore version with kind of Urgot and Cho'Gath, or you can play the ExoTech version. They're both going to be good. Um, the ExoTech version is shown down here, but a lot of times you will use the ExoTech version as a way to have a way to transition into the higher cap version. So it's not surprising that the data will show performing worse. I will also say that because ExoTech Zeri is picking up a lot of popularity, playing around the Vexotech version is going to be a lot scarier just because you're going to be way more contested on Sejuani. And even like Mordekaiser, Varus, it all adds up. So just keep that in mind. If you see other players angling towards Zeri, you're trying to play Vexotech, it may be difficult to pick up Sejuani, which is very impactful. Anima Squad, I think, did not get that many changes. What I will say about this patch overall that's very important to understand is that there were a lot of things that got buffed. Dynamo got a small nerf, but overall, way more things got buffed than nerfed. So I think Anima Squad is like relatively very unchanged. Like Jhin got a small buff to Dynamo, I guess. You're playing that here. Yeah, overall I would say like Anima Squad's pretty unchanged. But because so many other things got buffed, it makes it worse in comparison. So just keep that in mind. Any comps that are untouched are going to be worse than before. You can still play this Zeri Misfortune version, of course. If you hit a Misfortune 2 on your roll down, you're definitely playing it, but as a default, lean towards the 7 ExoTech. Definitely check out the stats for the ExoTech items. Um, let's just sort by average placement and make sure that you're playing ExoTech when you have the good items. So you can see Pulse is pretty overwhelmingly the favorite. Flux and Hyperfanes are like the next best ones, and Cybercoil and Hollowbow are pretty noticeably worse than the others. So if you have Hollowbow and Cybercoil, I would try to not play Exotech if possible. You still can do it, but it's going to be a lot weaker than if you have, like Pulse, Flux, and Chassis or Lantern. You're always going to have 2 offensive and 1 defensive, or 1 offensive and 2 defensive. You can't get 3 offensive, so. Ideally, you don't have Cybercoil or Hollowbow. If you don't have either one, it's a good signal to play Exotech. All right, going back to our comps. Marksman Vanguard still going strong. Pretty familiar comp we've seen. I will say now that Zeri is more popular, before you would see people slamming Rageblade early, and you would kind of think that they're playing around Aphelios. But now because Zeri is more popular, this line you can kind of flex it more uncontested. You can kind of see what people are angling by seeing what units they're holding on their bench or what board they're playing. So this comp is easier to get uncontested. Again, I will note this comp did not receive that many changes, which makes it a little weaker relatively because so many other comps got buffed. Some reroll comps, Twist of Fate, pretty familiar comp, still doing all right. Amp, familiar comp, still doing all right, but not too many changes to either of these comps. So again, they're a little worse relatively. Street Demon, kind of the same thing going on here. Nitro reroll, Gorilla reroll. I feel like Gorilla reroll is actually better than the stats show. I find that it's still heavily misplayed, even um even in like NA Challenger, for example. But if we look at like Seraphine versus Zyra itemization, we can see that Zyra is actually itemized more frequently than Seraphine, but I think almost all the top NA challengers agree that Seraphine is the better item holder. And it's actually reflected in the data. You can see that Seraphine's 3 items 52% of the time averages a little bit better than 4. Zyra's itemized more frequently, and she averages a decent bit worse. 0.2 is actually pretty significant. The reason is Seraphine just scales into the late game better. She's hitting potentially up to 8 units, whereas Zyra is hitting just her target and 1 more unit. So I think like this comp is misrepresented in the data because people are incorrectly itemizing Zyra. Bruisers, there's not too many comps using Cho'Gath, so if you scout around, Bruisers are uncontested. You might be able to use this as a front line. You can also use it with Dynamo, for example. The Dynamo is kind of showing like the high cap board with Zac, Kobiko, and Renekton. But on level 8, you could just play like 4 Bruiser, 4 Dynamo, and eventually transition with Gragas and Kobiko. Gragas, again, receiving a small buff this patch. Shaco reroll, still familiar comp doing well. Graves, still doing well. I think Graves is also a frequently misplayed comp. First of all, I think Golden Ox is just kind of fun, so people overplay this comp from bad spots just because it's a fun comp to farm gold and they just like playing the comp. But I think a lot of people are not properly positioning their Graves either. Let's see what MetaTFT shows here. Yeah, so I think a lot of times you actually want to try to wrap their backline with your strongest tank in front of your Graves to deal damage. Then also needs to be over here. So these 3 units can kill their unit here as fast as possible, and Graves can dash in. Another thing you can try to do, it's really important to be on the right side for this. You can try to pull their tank if someone has a solo frontline. Like if your opponent has a solo frontline here, this unit is a little closer, so she'll always walk this way, and then a lot of times you can actually kill. Let's say they have, let's say they have like a Jarvan 2 over here playing or Vanguard, you can kill this unit, and then your Graves can kill their entire backline before dealing with their strongest tank. So I think Graves is also underrepresented in the data. I think a lot of top NA challengers are very fond of this comp for sure. Vanguard rerolls, familiar comp, and yeah, I think that's about it. Some variations of stuff. Bastion Morgana, notably, got hit by the Dynamo nerf, and again, is a comp that is relatively unchanged, so worse relatively. Again, with ExoTech being more popular, it makes people hold Jaxes, it makes people hold Sejuanis. It's going to make the comp a little bit worse. That's going to wrap it up for this video on the 14.6 meta update. If you have any questions or comments, let me know in the TFT coaching Discord. Thanks for watching.